Hi everyone. For this week's assignment, I decided to do my topic on the No Child Left Behind policy that we discussed back in week 2. The main focal question that I decided to focus on here was, to what extent is the No Child Left Behind policy positively impacting our students? To this question, I'm going to answer that I would argue, based on preliminary research, that it is in fact not positively impacting our students. It is in fact negatively impacting our students. This paper will seek to determine the positive impacts and the negative impacts of the No Child Left Behind policy for the purpose of suggesting alternatives that will be addressed, composed, and contrasted with my longer literature review thesis that I will complete later in the course. So the purpose for my topic choice. On the original assignment that we did in week 2, many of you suggested that my second topic, how standardized testing isn't impacting students, would be a good area for me to look at here. I decided ultimately not to do this, mostly because when looking at this, I decided that it was just too broad of a scope and it was not specialized enough for this type of assignment. As such, I decided that this will be more of a larger focus for my lit review that I'll focus on, and I'll take this one more down to a specific. So I chose to do the No Child Left Behind, which allows for specialization in specific areas of the policy. This is going to set a basis for later research on standardized testing that will be expanded upon, searching for validity in this policy in comparison to standardized testing across the board, specifically standardized testing in Canada versus standardized testing in the United States. As an outside observer, because I am teaching at a Canadian school to this U.S. policy, I hope to use it as an effective counter-model to educational reforms that I will be proposing in my lit review, as well as within this paper assignment. So it's hopefully going to allow for a comparative analysis to my Canadian models, such as the provincial achievement tests in Alberta, the Ontario literacy test in Ontario, and the diploma exams that are facing here in Alberta as well. It will also address the no zero policy that's kind of floating around Canada right now. All right, so for my focal questions, I decided to have a little group here. The focal questions for this paper, improving the No Child Left Behind policy is having a negative impact on students are: is the No Child Left Behind policy effectively assessing our students? What effects is the No Child Left Behind policy having on students? Is the No Child Left Behind policy providing motivation to do better in school? How are teachers being impacted by the No Child Left Behind policy? And is the No Child Left Behind policy punishing our students? I hope to use these sub-questions in proving my larger question that I stated at the beginning of this assignment. So on the following slides, I'm going to address some of the preliminary research that these questions have focused on, and then each independent question I will address with kind of what I liked and kind of what I've seen so far up to this point. And then I'm going to kind of close out with an impact on rural schools and schools near the AYP level. So for the first question, is the No Child Left Behind policy effectively assessing our students? I would argue no for this. I'd say that for the most part, or from at least what I've seen so far in the research, that it's setting up school districts for failure. This isn't, of course, in regards to every school district, but for the most part, within each district and each school, based on population levels, there's always the chance and the possibility that these students are not achieving where they should be, and as a result are being impacted negatively. I also saw that it's creating conflict within pedagogical and leadership behaviors, leading towards limited instruction within the classroom. As the No Child Left Behind policy comes out, we are teaching to the test rather than teaching with interesting methods and interesting assignments in our class. Thus, we're losing part of the creative process for our students. I'm also seeing accountability-based policy such as No Child Left Behind not providing proper guidance and support to build capacity for change within our districts. Rural schools specifically are seeing significant impact, as single students doing poorly on a test has a greater impact on the school average as a whole. To this I basically mean, if a single student is not achieving well on the standardized test, and the school population in a rural district, which is about 22% of the United States right now, they are going to have a large negative impact on the school overall, and thus reducing them in a larger degree. It does not take into account or address the special needs students outside of the 2% of the grades schools are allowed to shave off as well. So for instance, if a school was completely based on special needs students, or they were specifically towards that end, the whole school would still be judged as though they were a regular public school, and the special needs considerations would not be taken into account, thus resulting in a negative result on the AYPs. My second question that I was going to address, and I have kind of looked at a little bit here, is what effects is the No Child Left Behind policy having on students? So far, what I've seen in the research is that students have begun to compare themselves to other students who may learn differently and thus lose confidence in themselves, rather than instilling in them the idea that, hey, this test, I need to do better on it, I need to improve myself. They're instead looking at other students and saying, hey, this person really did really well, and then withdrawing into themselves, becoming depressed, and losing faith in the education system. They're seeing shame, humiliation, stress, fear upon learning that they failed and or did poorly, self-doubt. All of these are things that I found in different surveys and different research that have been tested across districts. Students who commented stated that it did not benefit them, it was a waste of time for them, or it was just something that they had to do to graduate, and they didn't really see any significance in the testing at all. Does the No Child Left Behind testing provide motivation to do better? As kind of addressed with the previous slide, testing is penalizing our students and punishing them by making them feel bad about themselves. At least this is what most students who completed the survey tested as. It creates increased stress and a lack of motivation as a whole to participate in any educational activities. As a result of this, tests are beginning to dictate what is taught in schools, and students are required to merely follow along rather than have a creative component or feel like they're involved in the classroom. We're also seeing a loss of innovative teaching strategies, which is also preventing students from becoming engaged as they could potentially be doing. Now, I don't want to say that the test is completely at fault here. Of course, material within a course can in fact be taught by a teacher in a way that is not teaching to the test. However, what we're seeing for the most part is because these tests are mandating for the most part teachers' jobs, and in fact we are, based on research we've seen that if schools do poorly, teachers are then held accountable for those students' marks, even if it's because the stronger students have left the school or the school has received less funding, so you don't have the same technology, and therefore the teachers are in fact afraid of losing jobs and or receiving lower pay. Teachers have begun comparing students as well. This has caused a loss of individualism in the classroom, and unique learning styles are being disregarded. Students are now being seen as student A, student B, and you're being expected to memorize specific test questions and testing strategies so that you can pass this. Therefore, the teacher then would keep their job. We see pushing strong teachers to schools that are achieving well, causing schools that are not achieving well to fall farther along those lines. We see using student achievement as a measurement of the teacher. This can and cannot, depending on your perspective, be a good or bad thing. Yes, it creates more accountability for the teacher in the classroom. You know, if the student does in fact do poorly, the teacher is slightly held accountable. However, we need to understand that not all students can be forced to learn. If the student doesn't want to learn something, that student probably won't learn something, and therefore should the teacher be held accountable for that student's weak achievement of that area. Also, we see, and we have seen in different states, basing salaries on student testing instead of the opposite, which would be to draw teachers to the school, giving incentives to teachers, protecting the teachers going to these lower and poor achieving schools. We're instead seeing the opposite, where teachers are now struggling and trying to move away from these schools. Within the rural school districts, we're seeing a lot of significant impact, specifically because the schools have less population. As I kind of addressed earlier in this presentation, one of the areas I'm going to focus on specifically is rural schools, and this is because one student's grades can and will have a more significant impact on the whole of the school rather than not. Changing class times to incorporate more reading and math, reducing science and social studies. So basically what's happened, or at least what we've seen happen based on research, is that schools are trying to adapt methods to increase student learning in the areas that are being tested on. And as a result, time schedules for language classes, reading classes, and math classes are being increased. We're seeing more of them appear in a daily, weekly schedule. And we're actually seeing much less science and social studies in a given day, in a given week. Most teachers also are who have been tested on this have said that science and social are less important subjects and therefore can be disregarded. Same goes for recess. We're seeing recesses being cut for the extension of school days, and in some cases we're actually seeing the school day itself becoming longer. This is just causing a big negative impact overall on the rural schools and our rural school communities, and it's something that needs to be addressed with the No Child Left Behind policy. To conclude this little PowerPoint that I got going here, to public, specifically to how the public perceives teachers in the workforce, this is something that they're very used to. Parents did test when they were in school. Our current political figures, our current government structure, everyone did test when they were in school, and therefore they're still expecting those tests to be done in school. They're not seeing the differences that can be made using different styles of assessment. So the fact that the No Child Left Behind policy is making teachers more accountable for learning is significantly overshadowed by the fact that they are now facing punishments for student achievement, even if they are in fact a great teacher. Teachers do not want to work at failing AYP schools, thus creating larger problems as those schools draw good teachers away from them and end up with teachers that struggle with student bodies that are constantly at the lower scales because good students are also not moving into those districts and into those areas. We're also seeing schools lack technology for administering proper or at least the same level of teaching that other schools will provide. And we're also seeing that the community itself is failing teachers. Public perception of what a teacher does, public perception of teaching as a whole is one thing that's causing a big negative stigma towards teaching in our community. And therefore, the public is thinking that the teachers are at fault, in fact, for their students failing in these areas, which may or may not be the case depending on the situation. I mean, I've talked to many parents and many teachers around the area, and some of the things I've heard is just that, you know, the idea that teaching is a profession is a line that some people are not as willing to cross as others. I mean, some people would say that teaching is not actually a profession, is in fact something else. And that is really hard, because what that tells teachers is that they're not part of this, and therefore the No Child Left Behind policy is in fact a policy that targets the teacher more so than it's targeting the student. Through this research over the course of this paper and furthering this into my literature review that will come later, I hope to show that money is becoming a major factor in this teaching issue. I mean, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on putting out these tests each year instead of spending that money on creating stronger teacher development, more professional development from their schools, and giving teachers more reason to be there. Instead, we're spending it on a test that's not fairly assessing all the students in our schools and not properly showing what is actually being achieved in the classroom. Up to this point, my research has shown me that the No Child Left Behind policy is creating a negative impact on students, teachers, schools, and the educational system as a whole. And throughout my paper, I will be proving these points using these research questions. Thanks for following along with me, and I hope you guys have some interesting comments on this issue for me. I appreciate it.